As the investigations into the Paris attacks continue, the Americans are looking to their political leaders with one question: what should we do now? And it's a legitimate question. What should our strategy or our role be when it does come to ISIS, Syria, Iraq? Should the U.S. take the lead? Should our response be primarily military? And how far should our help extend when it comes to those displaced Syrian refugees? All legitimate and all serious questions in search of serious answers. Unfortunately, some of those answers have been particularly hard to come by, especially with a few notable figures. Donald Trump, of course. Trump, he linked the massacre at Paris Theater to a European gun control and said he considers shutting down mosques in the U.S. as well for good measure. Then there's the question of Syrian refugees. Governors of these states, and now there's more states than not, don't want to host any Syrian refugees. And for the record, only one of these governors, Democrat, the balance all Republicans. And how about presidential candidate Ted Cruz, who went one step further? Cruz says he's okay with the U.S. taking in Syrian refugees, but only if those refugees are Christian. They'd have to pass, as he said, a religious test. And Cruz has company in that position, surprisingly, Jeb Bush, or at least what was Jeb Bush's position just this weekend.
I don't think we should eliminate our support for refugees. It's been a noble tradition in our country for many years.
Including Muslim refugees? You don't want to ban Muslim refugees from coming to the United States. Forget about the bill.
The answer to this, though, is not to ban people from coming. The answer is to lead to resolve the problem in Syria.
Okay, now for more, let's bring in our panel. Jeannie Zanos, a professor of political science at Iona College and also professor of campaign management at NYU. Brad Gersons, political consultant and founding partner of Gotham Government Relations. Jessica Proud, Republican strategist and PR expert with the November team, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Okay, I think the juiciest topic of this is going to be the refugees, because I'm already seeing some Democrats, waffling a little bit on what to do on that. But before we get to that, militarily and figuring out what the American public wants. And Jeannie, I always defer to you on the poll numbers on this. This too fresh to get the pulse of the American public, but there's a fatigue from the public when it comes to Afghanistan and Iraq. But whenever there's a sudden attack, the blood boils, the people want to get into it. Now, the president made it clear when he said, hey, you know what? Sounds good. I hear all the words and all the tough talk here. But in the absence of a strategy, before I go put American boots on the ground, American lives at risk here, it doesn't end the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. There's a political vacuum attached to this. What do the American public want as it relates to military intervention with Syria? Not just bombing raids, but if we're going to do something serious about this, what kind of a commitment do you think they want from the military, does the American public?
If you look at the polls, the American public is saying they do not want to get involved in an entrenched war over there. That said, this attack in Paris and the video which suggests that Washington, D.C. may be next is going to change that. But that said, I think we have to take a step back. I think the president has made a big mistake in terms of his unwillingness to lead on this issue. And in terms of leading, I mean, the president has got to make the point. This is not just a Barack Obama decision that we shouldn't put boots on the ground. ISIS has long claimed their goal is to get the American military on the ground there, so this is a Muslim versus Christian battle. That is the last thing that should happen, and Obama has to make that case, not because he feels that way, but because that is going to be an intractable situation. We cannot win if we put boots on the ground. That is a non-winning strategy. And so he hasn't made that case, and unfortunately, his press conference yesterday further entrenched him in this problem. So he's got to educate on this more than he has done. And quite frankly, the White House sending Ben Rhodes out there all weekend, it wasn't a winning strategy. Ben Rhodes is not an inspiring or respected national security figure. And that's been a problem for the White House all along on this.
To that point, I've spoken this week already to military analysts, I've spoken to counterterrorism experts and all the rest. Nobody's got a silver bullet to fix this thing. But to Jeannie's point, people think if you just all of a sudden put boots on the ground, or as Donald Trump, he wants to make Syria a parking lot here and wipe out as if they're all wearing uniforms and it's a video game or something like this. You can't just do it with aerial assaults. But now you've got Hollande who says, hey, U.S., you help here, and if you're not, I'll go to Russia, see if they'll lead. They've had a jet that's been taken down. We've had threats now in Germany, not just obviously what happened to the poor folks in France. There's a vacuum here. Now, the president said today, I thought it was pretty strong to say, you just hear these guys talking tough, but there's no substance to it. And I think Jeannie's right that the polls reflect that there's a reticence. People have seen this show before in Afghanistan, Iraq, and they don't know how this thing ends. But the optics matter too, and the tone matters as well. I think the president shut it down and also kind of not dismissed it, but minimized it to a certain degree yesterday. I don't think it sounded as well as it should have.
No, and I agree with Jeannie that he's, as far as his communication strategy, it's awful. I mean, I would give it an F when it comes to this. However, what he means and what he's doing isn't inconsistent with what the American people want to do when it comes down to it. Do they want some symbolic type of raids and bombing and some drone attacks and things like that? Maybe they want that. We've been doing it. This president has done more of that than anyone has done. However, you know, if I was him, I would be looking for a coalition to try to go in there with some boots on the ground. But I'll tell you, even my suggestion of doing that isn't even consistent with what the Republican candidates for president or any Republican is saying. No Republican is being firm in saying that they specifically want boots on the ground, and here's the plan on what we would do once we're there. So the reality of it all is, it seems like, except for just like words and some BS,
exactly.
Everybody seems almost on the same page here, confused.
Yeah, because for years it's been a void of leadership by this president. And you had just the other day, he released 5 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. I mean, what kind of message is he sending here? ISIS is the JV team. ISIS is contained. Terrorism is over. I mean, he's been making these kind of claims, trying to downplay this all along, when you have the exact opposite happen. So people are feeling afraid. They're feeling confused. They may not want to go into another entrenched war on their own, but they know America needs to lead on the national stage, and having that not happen.
I'm with you. It's mixed messaging, Jessica. But what does that mean, though, in terms of a military commitment? What's our end game? Yes, he could have yelled yesterday, but more than that, what do specifically the American public want? And don't just say leadership. What does that mean?
They want a strategy, and there has been no strategy, which the president himself admitted. Look, I'm not suggesting that America goes in there and that this is only our fight. It's not. We need to reach out to our allies, but our allies need confidence that America is going to step up and lead, and not this half in and half out that we've seen over the last several years, the drawing of the red lines and crossing them.
We could go through NATO. Right? And they've been talking about Article 5, right? And then that way, an attack on France is an attack against all the allies, and then somebody else other than the U.S. can have skin in the game. You know, that's another thing I play.
I mean, that's certainly an option. Look, we have to remember there was a geographic component to this at first, which was the expansion of ISIS across Syria and Iraq. And the first goal was to try to pull that back and pen them in. And that's been somewhat successful. And a lot of people are arguing that's one of the reasons why ISIS is now branching out into international terrorism in a way that they haven't done before, because their goal for a caliphate to expand across the Middle East seems to have been rebuffed thanks to military action, in part with the United States. But I think the president, as well as European allies, as well as Republicans, are all in the same box. Everybody wants to roll ISIS back. Everybody wants to hurt ISIS. But nobody wants to give it the full commitment of putting the military in place and risk exposing us to a long-term war. And I don't think the European allies want that either.
And you can't just do it from the air.
Nobody has a really good plan right now.
I don't want to lose time before we get to the second part, which is the refugees. Okay, as everybody knows here, you've got now up to 26 governors, I believe was the last count, and 25 of them being Republicans saying, not in my backyard. Okay, now it's not the governor's take on this. The federal government sets immigration policy, so it sounds good, okay? But nonetheless, I did notice, Brad, that even Mayor de Blasio was like, oh, well, I got to go talk to Bratton on this one. And even Schumer saying, well, maybe we just got to first do this. One guy might have come through this. And even then, we're not positive as to his ties with ISIS and whether he smuggled through or not. But let's even say he did, okay? We've all seen the photos of these people, okay? They're families primarily here. It's not all, you know.
Actually, that's not true. It's 72% are fighting age males.
No, but we have a ton of children and women that are also involved in this.
But 72%
I've heard the number
are
different.
males.
But let's agree. What should our response be? Should we have any commitment whatsoever to this population?
Well, I think, first of all, the governor has come out saying that he's committed to bringing the refugees in, and now the mayor too. And but I think it's a tricky thing politically also, because I think if you ask, forget the politicians, if you ask the people, even the most liberal, and they say, would you like them in your neighborhood? Would you like them in the city? Would you like these refugees being taken in? I think the citizens are starting to say, you know what, I'm a liberal.
All it takes is one lunatic.
I don't need this in my backyard. And I posed this question to a number of liberals, and they have been uneasy with that situation. So the politicians coming out, Democrats are going to find themselves possibly in a very difficult scenario, because this will be used against them either by the Republicans for sure, and it could be other Democratic opponents come the primary season.
I think Brad's right, Pacini. Leave it to some of these candidates to somehow take an easy answer and go too far, okay? Ted Cruz, who wouldn't be a candidate for president if his father wasn't a refugee from Cuba who came here, right? And for that matter, now Donald Trump, talking about, and to a lesser degree, Jeb Bush before he flip-flopped on it, religious tests for these people when they come here. What was the whole premise of this country? To flee religious persecution and be able to have your faith. So, and Trump wants to shut down mosques and all the rest here, but that to me, whenever you can have a legitimate debate as to maybe want to reanalyze the policy, I look at guys like this and I hear this and I say, I'm not with these guys. That's not the America that I grew up reading in the books,
Yeah, and I think I was talking yesterday to the police commissioner, and I think the real problem with the Syrian refugee crisis is, on the one hand, I think most Americans, Republicans or Democrats, are very sensitive to the plight of people, women and children, elderly men who have been victimized by this horrific terror. And yet, by the same token, you talk to anybody in law enforcement and they say, as I think Brad alluded to, there's no vetting process that is 100% going to tell us whether in fact these people are some kind of terrorist or, stole a passport, whatever it is. And so that, I think, leaves the American public in a very precarious situation. And that's where I think we have this real vacuum of leadership. And unfortunately, I think you're going to see the Ted Cruz's and the other arguments come into play to fill that vacuum. I think the American people are right to be concerned. That said, we have to, and I think the president was right to hearken back to the Pope and say, we have an obligation to people, and the American government needs to make sure that vetting process goes smoothly. If they can't guarantee that's a problem.
The director of the FBI himself said to the Homeland Security Committee, we have no way to vet these people. It's not like the president is calling up Assad and saying, hey, it's Barack, can you run these names for me?
Okay,
sorry,
so
I'm trying to take you out.
Because I'm up on a break, so what do you do with them?
Because you have to pause. You have to pause. You cannot just allow these people to come into the country that you have no way to vet them. You can't let people in that cannot be vetted. I'm sorry. Americans come first.
100%.
You can only let people in that you can have a trace from. You cannot just allow people to come in that you cannot vet them. And the vast majority of those people, there's no process to vet them.
Okay, so what do we do?
I don't know. You have to go over and have safe zones there. There's a lot of other options. You attack the problem, but it's about time. It's political. It's enough with the political correctness, and it's not about being racist or not having an open heart. It's about protecting our borders. That is our federal government's number one job.
You did hear
national
what Ted
security.
Cruz says, okay?
What did he say? Let's call a spade a spade. Who's being persecuted? Christians.
You think it's just Christians?
It's primarily Christians.
No.
Yes, it is.
You have Sunni, Shia battling going on. There's ethnicism. This isn't just on religion.
The majority of people that ISIS are targeting are Christians. That's a fact.
So we let the Christians in, we don't let the other ones.
No, he's saying let's prioritize and give them preference.
No, let's do religious tests. Was his exact words. Okay?
To me, this is all knee-jerk reaction and pandering for an election at its absolute worst. There are so many easier ways for people who want to do us harm to get into this country rather than posing as refugees and getting through a long, protracted process by which refugees are vetted before they come into this country, as opposed to, let's say, the 9/11 hijackers who are here on student visas. They absolutely are vetted.
You can't check them back to Syria where
there's a vetting process that goes on when
based
any
on a
refugee is allowed
US
into this country
database.
based on religious
If
issues
they
like this
have-
one.
if they
And the
have
process goes
information on
through
them,
an
Andrew.
We will
deliberate
continue our debate on
process.
this issue, and we want you to weigh in at home. Would you want your state to house refugees? Well, Given what you've seen in Paris, what's your answer? Head over to our Facebook page and shape your opinion on Twitter as well. Coming up next, we'll get much closer to home here, but nonetheless contentious. Albany. 2 top players in it on trial at the same time in 2 different courthouses. After the break, we'll head down to Lower Manhattan for an update on the corruption probes of former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver and former Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos, both facing juries, both at the same time.